Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be putting Lincoln Zephyr gears in an early Ford transmission. Is it easy? Is it hard? We're going to find out. When I'm working on early Ford transmissions, I use Greasy Garage hand and tool wipes. This is owned by a veteran right here in America. It's not owned by some big Chinese corporation across seas. If you guys watched my channel for any length of time, you know how I feel about that kind of stuff. So I love supporting Americans. It has a nice textured side and a nice soft side. So this is awesome if you're working on a carburetor, you want to hop in the car real quick, start it up. You're tuning it, you need to drive it real quick. Wipe off your hands and your elbows. This gets you clean fast. And it gets your tools super clean. Honestly, I don't clean my tools with anything else other than some hand wipes. I'll have a link in the description of this video. Go pick yourself up some hand and tool wipes. Buy them from a veteran. Don't buy them from some big Chinese corporation overseas. And real quick, I want to give you a quick tip on oil leaks on the back of these early Ford transmissions. It's something I've shown off before. Some people still haven't noticed or seen the older videos, but there is no gasket or any way to seal back here on the back of these early Ford transmissions. We literally just have a shaft that goes in here and we pretend like oil is not going to leak out of that. Now, hopefully you're using 600 weight oil or really thick viscosity oil for these transmissions. But some of the guys who experience oil leaks, it's because they're using too thin of oil and it comes right through this passage that has, like I said, no way of actually sealing. So this is the reverse idle air shaft here. And I'm actually gonna have to hone that a little bit to get that to fit in there better. Then we have what I call the counter shaft that goes all the way through here. To get these from leaking is what I do is I actually use a step bit and just only a little tiny bit. I give us a little bit of a shoulder right there on both sides here. Then the counter shaft goes all the way to the front and I give us a shoulder right here on the front. So what that's gonna do is after you get this thing fully assembled and these shafts are not rotating, really big deal for them to not rotate. You go ahead and put silicone around that little shoulder that we just created. So it gives us a little bit of silicone between the shaft and the case and also helps it from leaking. This is not my idea, guys. This is something that's been going on for like 70 or 80 years for rebuilding these early Ford transmissions. I'm still surprised that I run into so many that don't already have those shoulders. So this is what guys have been doing for a very long time. And that's one of the issues, one of the main things I see with cases leaking. And be on the lookout for that with yours. It's a very simple, easy fix. It takes like 30 seconds. All right, so for this whole process that I'm doing here, this doesn't work for just Zephyrs. This also works for early Ford transmissions. So I'm not gonna just show you just Zephyr only stuff. I'm gonna show you a little bit more transmission stuff too, guys, because I really want you to be able to do this stuff at home. More guys rebuilding and maintaining these, the better. More that are on the road, more our whole little culture of early Ford guys can grow. So it's always good to share knowledge. So what I'm gonna do is demonstrate how to assemble this right here on the bench. This is something I haven't done in any of my videos. I've done a lot of transmission videos. I've shown you how to assemble it inside the transmission. It's hard to get a good view of everything I'm doing when my hands are in this little slot and I'm putting everything together. So I'm gonna show you how to do it on the table. Now that I'm gonna be demonstrating this, I highly recommend for you guys to do this first. Put it together on the table, make sure you got everything right, then take it apart and put it together, which is a little bit more difficult in the case. So this is actually really good practice. And I want to show you a difference in thrust washers. This is a pretty big deal too. So we have two different year counter shafts. I know people call them different names. I call them counter shafts because I've been rebuilding all sorts of transmissions for a long time. It's just something that's stuck in my head. The name's not important. The knowledge of how to put together is important. So I call these counter shafts. We got two different years here. And when you buy a rebuild kit, you're going to get multiple thrust washers. Well, which one do you use? Here, this is going to be the easy answer right here. Which one do you use? So if we look at these thrust washers, if we look at these counter shafts, you can see that they're going to take different thrust washers. This one has like a T notch. This one has like a reversed cross notch. And one thrust washer is going to fit in one and one is not going to fit in the other. So this one's for the cross style counter shaft. You can see the cross notches. Then you can see this one's cut out for the T thrust washer style counter shaft. So boom, that's going to fit in there. This one is going to spin until it fits in there. Those are our thrust washers. These move with the counter shaft. They do not stick to the case. On the flip side, they do. So here's two different thrust washers. This one came with this rebuild. I'm not going to use it. This is plastic. I'm not okay with plastic. Feel better with brass. So I'm going to use the brass one. So I don't know where this washer came from. I didn't buy this rebuild kit, but I do get my rebuild kits from the early Ford store. They have the best rebuild kit. And if you're looking for the gaskets, the best gaskets, ironically, is by Best Gasket. But here's the other thrust washer that goes on the other side, on the bottom. And they have this cutout on the back. That actually holds to the case, so this doesn't spin. We do not want this one to spin. We do want this one to spin. This is how Ford made it. All right, let's set these aside. And let's assemble the input shaft and the output shaft, because this is the most technical part that I can never really show very well in the case. So I'm going to show you how to do it on the table, on the bench, so you can get a good view of it. All right, so we have the input shaft here. We have the output shaft here. This rides on the inside of the input shaft, which I left my bearing in there by accident. So let's go ahead and assemble this on the bench. So we're going to start right here with our first reverse gear. This fork. So this is the front. This is going to slide on here after I line these up. And the fork portion is going to be facing to the rear. So just like that. The fork grabs here, moves it from first to reverse, like that. Next, we're going to get our washer here. This washer is to keep oil from going out through the bearing outside, out to the output shaft there. So, horrible design, honestly, from the early Fords. There's no real gasket between this and the output shaft. Now, the smaller bearing, it slides on here, but you're going to have to use a press. Some guys heat them up. I don't like to heat up bearings like red hot. I don't think that's good for the bearings, but to each their own. So I'm going to take this upstairs and put it in the press. Now this is shouldered, so it's really important to get it on the right way because you're going to press a bearing onto it afterwards. So we're going to put this on here, and the shoulder is going to go up over the gears here. So you can see how it's stepped in. So it's either going to go away from the gears or it's going to go over the gears. So make sure it goes up over the gears. That cutout is for this here. It matches perfectly. So when you're doing it, you can see it better and you'll see what I'm talking about. Push this on with this ring facing back, because when this goes to the case, this ring is flush with the outside of the case. This is going to set our lash. These snap rings set our lash, as crazy as that is. So make sure you put that on the right way. It just won't go on the other way. So now that we have that together, and I'm not going to push this on yet because I'm not ready to actually assemble. I'm just demonstrating. Let's go right into second gear. And okay, here it is. This is a little step off. I wouldn't consider this any kind of thrust washer of any sort. It just gives us a little step here, and it locks into this little hook here that's also on the output shaft. That's why it has this cutout. So that's going to lock in place. We don't want that to move. Second gear is going to slide on and push up against that. So second gear does the spinning, and it's going to spin against that. So it's kind of a washer that takes a little bit of a wear out a little bit, and you're going to need to replace it. So that should be brand new during this part of the assembly. Now, people like to throw this on first, which I'm going to tell you that's wrong, unless you've done it 100 million times and that's the way you like to do it. What I want to show you, if you're a beginner, is where these notches go. Why is there notches here at all? So these notches are for our little detent squares here. So when you do your rebuild, you should have had all these detents out. You should have replaced them, and it should have a new spring, new detents. The older ones have the square or the spring inside the hole here, which is a nightmare to put together. The later ones that I just put on everything, because there's really no difference, guys. I put the later ones like this on all the transmissions just because they're easy to install, easy to replace, and not as easy to lose during rebuild. So this cutout goes against those slots there. So if I put it in wrong, you can see that there's a gap here, and I'll spin it until it goes on right. And I'm going to push this a little bit out of the way. You can see it's going to sit flush and flat right here. I've run into issues where these steps, these cutouts were not long enough. When I put it here, it didn't sit all the way flush like it's supposed to. I had to grind these steps down more so the whole case of the transmission wasn't underneath so much pressure. Because if you do it like this, these being wider pushes everything apart and it puts it under bad pressure. So I'm making sure that that fits and it sits flush. Yes, it does. flip it to the other side. I'm gonna put this side on, make sure it fits and sits flush. And when they're both on, they're both flush with that inner synchronizer hub on the inside. So that's good. I don't need to grind anything down there. So with these together, I'm gonna slide this over onto our output shaft. And this is where we put our snap ring on. Not right now. When we have all this inside the case, we'll put the snap ring on, boom, it locks this whole assembly in together. I can't tell you how many transmissions I've rebuilt with that bearing is burnt up, charcoal, nasty and dry. That oil just doesn't get in there. Pack that sucker as much as you possibly can. Fill this whole cavity if you have to. Just too heavy of a weight to go into such a small area. So be really mindful of that. That bearing can be loud and noisy, and some guys think it's the throw-up bearing, and really it's that bearing. So that's something I want you guys to be aware of. Now next, the larger bearing, same thing. Both of these rings, the snap rings, go on the outside. Boom, just like that. Outside to outside, like this. This does not slide on either. This I also press in. Some guys heat them up. That's up to you on what you think is better. I never actually tell you guys what to do with your guys' stuff. If you think something's better, go for it. I'll just tell you my experience and let you guys have the information. So that is the whole top. That makes it look really simple, right? This is not that much going on. Once you know which direction everything faces and where all the parts go, this is actually pretty simple. So let's go ahead and take this apart now that we understand how this is assembled, and let's actually start putting stuff in the case. So you need to know where all this stuff goes, what direction everything faces in, what goes where. That's actual information you guys really need to understand and not throw it together not knowing exactly what's even going on just by following a picture. You need to understand it as much as possible, just in case, because a lot of times I've had customers bring me this whole thing in a box, not saying any names, Paul, but you could be out picking somewhere, find some parts now that you know what they look for or what they look like, buy them and actually build you a transmission for fairly cheap if you start piecing it one piece at a time. And you need to know how to assemble it if it's just all in a giant box. Oh, one thing else I want to bring up with everything out in the open is these two small bearings go on either side of our, here it is, of our little spacer. So this is just a spacer. I do recommend lubing up the inside pretty good. It has the opportunity to spin, and it has the opportunity to wear this shaft out. A lot of times these transmissions be hard to take apart because there's a notch in this inside the counter shaft, inside the transmission, where you cannot get to it, and really you just got to beat it out and be unhappy about it later. So it's going to go bearing, spacer, bearing on the top. That's how you're going to assemble that. And like anything else, make sure you pack your bearings really, really good. All right, now as I was actually getting ready to assemble this, I realized I left this front washer out here. It's not really a washer, it's also what keeps the oil out of the bearing and coming out of the input shaft. But it also has a step, and it also steps into the gear, not away from the gear. So, whoops, made a mistake and didn't explain that in my video just a second ago. So now I'm gonna go upstairs and actually press this bearing on here. And I'm going to put some lubrication on it. Simply Lube. Push it on. It actually goes on fairly easy with my little bench press upstairs. And that will be ready to go. Next, I'll press on the bearing for the output shaft. But I'm going to take this snap ring off. This allows you to insert it from the inside, then put the snap ring on after the fact. It just makes life a little bit easier, guys. So keep that in mind. Get this on here the correct way. Take the snap ring off. That's going to allow you to assemble it a little bit easier. So when you're pressing on your output shaft bearing, make sure this ring is at the bottom. It's towards the output side of the output shaft, because this is the input side of the input shaft. Make sure first reverse is on, and make sure that that fork cutout is facing rearward. And I'd love to press this and show you guys at the same time, but I need to hold, well, I'll try it a couple pushes, but this is very simple, guys. No need to heat this up. I'm barely pushing, and it's pushing down into it. And I'm gonna go back to holding first gear so it doesn't fall down onto my bearing. Now I'm packing all these bearings with a really heavy manual transmission assembly goo. So this isn't the type of goo that's going to melt and become part of the transmission oil like automatic transmissions. This is a lot heavier. It's actually going to stay there for quite a while. So you can look that brand up if you want. You can use a brand that you prefer. But this is what I like to do. All right, now that I got all that packed and ready to go, let's get my hands a little bit cleaner here. Like butter. Nice and clean like butter. So put a little bit of assembly lube on the slider here for first gear and work it back and forth and wipe off any extra or excess. This doesn't really need that much assembly lube. What I do after I get this all together is I actually, in the case, I spray a little bit of WD-40 on everything, work everything back and forth, spray a little WD-40 on it again. And I do that just to get a little lubrication everywhere before that thick oil grease gets everywhere. And a lot of my customers, they want me to rebuild a transmission to have on the shelf. So when the one they have blows, because a lot of my customers race now, if that transmission blows, they can just swap them out real quick in a weekend and send me the blown one. So a lot of my transmissions that I do sit on shelves for a year, a couple years, and I don't want them to get rusted together, which is something that does happen with these early transmissions that sit still. So WD-40 is not going to hurt anything until you actually fill it up with some grease or 600 weight oil. And put a little bit of grease on our little synchronizers here, our little teeth. And not very much. This is one of those times where I actually say, don't do that much, just a little tad bit. But when it gets down in here to the brass bearing, we want to do a lot. So it's hard for oil to get down in here. Also, they have all these little tiny holes here. You'll see it better on yours. But there's all these little holes. All those cavities need to be completely filled with grease. A little bit of goo on our teeth here. If you pre-assembled this, I goo this up pretty good in my videos. You can see in my other transmission videos, I think I have 7 or 8 of these videos now. And they're doing really good. So I appreciate you guys watching so much of these transmission videos. But it should have assembly lube on the inside of the slider too. Okay, so here's the part where I always struggle to demonstrate and capable of you guys seeing what I'm filming here. But I'll do my best. So we're going to start with this washer here. This is the only one that needs to stick to the case and not move. It has a tab on the back like I showed earlier. And I completely greased it, so when it goes into the tab on the case, hopefully it sticks and doesn't move. I've also filled that cavity on the case and filled the inside of here. So this is a frustrating part, or maybe one of the few frustrating parts of actually doing this part of the process, because when we put in this counter shaft, we're not gonna put the rod in. We're not gonna actually secure it in place. It's just gonna sit in the bottom and roll around as we assemble everything else, because it'll otherwise be in our way. So our 2 short bearings, short bearing completely packed, ready to go. And I'm fine with that excess there. That's going to help throw our washer on. The splitter, I put a bunch of grease inside here. I didn't grease this, but I greased the crap out of the inside. So assembly lube, grease, whatever. Then my other short bearing here. Now, different years have different size of that offset bar and different sizes of the bearing. So just be mindful of that. I ran into that once or twice. And hopefully this sticks on as good as the first time I did it. That was nice. Stick in place. Now let's slide this in here and hope that this washer in the front doesn't move. This should be a little bit tight. You should have to roll it to get it into place. So I'm rolling it there, and it went into place. And I'm going to pack this little cavity right here. This is the oiler for this back thrust washer. And I just want something to be there so we can pick up a little bit. And we're gonna leave this at the very bottom of the case. Otherwise, we won't have room to put everything else together inside the case. So after we get the whole input and output shaft bolted together, we're gonna flip it upside down or on its face and put in the counter shaft rod to actually hold it in place. That part is probably the only frustrating part of the whole assembly, I would say. Now I need to pack the inside of this reverse gear really good. The shoulder goes to the rear, so when we put it in, shoulder to the rear. And we can go ahead and install the reverse because there will not be room to do it after the fact. So let's get cleaned up a little bit. Even when I'm doing this, I still don't like my hands to get very greasy. Now a little trick to getting the reverse shaft on is we're going to put that keeper actually on it. We're going to lubricate it a little bit. And technically you should be able to grab this little T-handle that you've created and just wiggle this in until the shaft is together. Just make sure you know that that grease can't be there when we go to put our silicone on. So I'm using it's good that it's tight. We want it to be tight. That's the only way that this really seals oil originally. But now that we put those shoulders on there, that's going to help out from its sealing in the long run. And we're going to leave it with the shaft not fully in there. We're going to leave our little keeper on the outside. This makes it easier when we go to put the counter shaft rod back in it. We can line these both up really, really well on the outside. Then just push them in the rest of the way. We already know they're lined up, and this keeper will slide right in and not have any issues. So we'll leave that there for now. And now the fun part of assembling this inside the case. So this is not the way that the old school manuals tell you to do it. This is the way that I found out is the easiest for me. I have nothing on this, so we can slide right in through the input shaft area. Then I can slide it back here, and I'll be able to assemble it once I push this bearing all the way through to the other side. Okay, now that I pushed it through to the other side, we can see it's easy to get everything assembled right here, and it gives us just enough room to actually reach everything. So let's put this together for real, and I'm going to lube a couple things as I go. Let's lube this little piece here that second will be running up against. Make sure this is not an original. Make sure this is a replacement. I always replace these. This is a wear area. And a little excessive lube. It will work itself away eventually right here in this area because it's a highly moving area. Easy for oil to get to. I just don't like to leave anything dry. Slide this on here, and it should lock into a little notch there that I showed you earlier. Now this is an oiler, this cutout here. So if you're rebuilding this, make sure that oiler is very clean. And I'm just going to put a good amount of assembly lube right there, because that is going to be spinning. Second gear will be spinning on that. Let's go ahead and put on second gear, which I've pre-lubricated. Get this lined up. Slide that all the way on there. Make sure it's all the way flush. Getting lubrication on this surface isn't a problem. Even the original books say to put a little lubrication on the synchronized brass areas. We do not want these to be dry. They actually end up filling full of oil. That cavity gets full of oil eventually anyways. Now I want to show you guys something while I'm at this part of the step that's really important. Now, some of the more experienced guys are going to notice that I'm not going to put this washer in there. This washer usually goes between second and the synchronizer block, synchronizer hub, or whatever you want to call it. On the Zephyr gears, how it's set up, the year of the gears and everything is not going to need this. Now you're going to be asking me, well, how do I know if mine needs it or not? So here, this is going to explain that part for you. When you're doing your bench assembly, go ahead and put that on there. Put the whole hub on and see if you can get the snap ring on. If you cannot get the snap ring on, your year does not use this washer. If you go to put this on, you put the snap ring on and there's play right here, your year does need this washer. I have so much stuff that I've memorized, guys. I can't remember what year needs this, what doesn't, because so many little tiny things changed from 1932 to 1948 on these transmissions, right? I don't remember which year needs this, which one doesn't, but the easiest way to check is just put it on and see if it needs that extra shim or if it doesn't need that extra shim. So just check that out on your guys' assembly. Now, I've already had assembled these rings here into the hub, or the synchronizers into the hub, and they sit flush, like I said before. That's super important. That's why I'm saying it so many times. But now we're going to go ahead and assemble this on to the output shaft. And I've done a lot of these videos. This is the first video I've showed you guys how to assemble it on the bench and not inside the case. And I'm really sorry for all the guys who watched my old videos where I did not do that. I'm so glad I did that this time. It just, you guys can really see the step-by-step process. Get that in there. Everything looks good front to back. I like it. I like it. Good. That's our whole thing right there, guys. So now we can put this bearing on. We can slide our input shaft in from the front. Oh, I didn't put my C-clip on. I did this whole spiel about the C-clip, guys, and I didn't get it yet. All right, let's put that C-clip on here, guys, right? That's what we're supposed to do next. So that's the difference between doing it and being really good at it and doing it and explaining it as you're doing it. For me, it's way two different things. So let's get that in there. This is a little bit of a struggle bus moment, to be honest. So let me get my hands clean. Struggle bus it out. All right, so let's watch me struggle so you guys know that this is hard. And it's not just me editing it to be really good, and I did it in 3 seconds. So this is the real deal. Make sure you get these pliers. If you're going to do more than one of these pliers are like 12 bucks. Just pick some of these up. They're made for this type of snap ring and not the modern snap rings that have the holes in them. So you can't really see what I'm doing. I have my thumb on one side to push it down over that notch. Because I want one side of it to grab. Go ahead and take this out so I don't fight it. That's not being held in by the snap ring at all. Got it. So I'm not going to edit that part of the video. You can see that is frustrating, but that's as fast as I actually do it. It's not just a really quick, easy thing. Put our synchronizer back in here. Make sure it sits flush. I'm going to say that over and over and over again, guys. That's really important. And let's go ahead and get our output shaft up into place. Now that this output shaft is sitting crooked in there and it's not going to fall in yet, I'm going to go ahead and put my snap ring on. Hopefully it doesn't fall in when I'm working on this. And that's what's going to keep it from falling all the way into the case for real when you actually have it all set up. And there's my handy dandy pliers. It's hard to do with these because it's so small. Got it. That's going to keep it. That's going to keep it from falling all the way into the case. And just for reference, here's my other set of snap ring pliers for later transmissions. It has the hook, the little holes. These snap rings do not have holes, and you just need something like that. That's giving our lash, so that's very important. Synchronizer fell off again on me. Locked into the tab. And I need to keep making sure you guys can see what I'm doing. Okay, now we're ready to put our input shaft on, and I'm realizing just now I might haven't mentioned it yet in this video, but there's a couple different bearing sizes in your kit. The counter shaft has a couple different styles of counter shafts with a couple different styles of inserts. That little spacer that spaces the bearings out. some of them require different size bearings. So either it's going to fit in there or it's going to be too long. So we have a long and a short on ours. Then on the top here, the input shaft is going to have the short. Now, here's a couple issues that you could find, or here's a way you could find that you're installing this incorrectly. So when I go to put this bearing in there that's packed already, and I put it on to the output shaft, there shouldn't be a big gap here. That ring that's on the back of the case is touching the case here. The snap ring that's on the input shaft bearing is touching here. We don't want a gap, because when we go to put our input and output shaft back on, that ring sits here in a groove, and that pushes it towards the case. There's just enough space here for the snap ring. So since there's just enough space, there's no movement in there. The snap ring isn't capable of moving around. The bearing is not capable of moving around. So when you put this all together, boom, there's no flex, there's no movement. But if you have the wrong bearing here, there will be a gap here. And when you put it together, this will be very, very tight. It will not spin over smoothly and easily. So I'm sorry I didn't say that earlier in the video, but that's a way to find out if you put it together wrong. And now that I have the input shaft in, everything is completely assembled except for our counter shaft rod here. What I'm going to do is put my input shaft cover on and the output shaft on. That's going to keep all this gear in place. Then I'm going to move the counter shaft up and move that in place and get the rod in that and actually get that seated fully, since there's no rod in here now, right? So I like to have this full input output completely together, not moving. Then I can work around with that counter shaft and not worry about dropping any of the stuff out by accident. Now I'm going to put the snap ring on here. I'm going to pack our seal here. So this is a new seal. And then I'm going to put a little bit of lubrication here, so where the throwout bearing assembly rides back and forth. So, and this was from Pre-War, Ford, and More. So Pre-War and More, I'm sorry. This is from Pre-War and More. Check them out. They're not known for transmission parts, but they are known for having a good variety of good original parts there. So, all right, I promise not editing out the stuff that's hard. So let's give this a shot. I'll see if I can do it quickly, and so you guys don't watch me struggle for 15-20 minutes. All right, guys, I lied to you. I didn't record it. I cussed a couple times. I turned on Somewhere Over the Rainbow song, meditated with the cheeseburger for about half an hour, came back and realized I could have done an old trick that's not my trick, that I've seen some of the older guys do, which I'm probably going to start doing now, is you take this, put it upside down, and when you open the ring, you push down really hard with this, and you can open this up with your hip, get a little bit more leverage to get it further open, and it doesn't buckle on you because you're pushing down with this, and it literally just went in like butter, like super easy. So I don't know why I didn't think about that a minute ago. So like I was saying, there's a difference between doing something and being really good at it and doing something and explaining it in a video at the same time. It's two different things. So let's be done with this. So now we can put this on. Now I can lubricate this shaft now and pack this. Now it's important to note that this is the drain for the oil, and these are not blind eye holes. These holes go straight into the case. Oil can leak up out of this through the bolt hole right here. Leak out of the head of the bolt. So two things to keep in mind when putting this part back together. I put Permatex on the bolt threads, so they're sealed. We have a gasket, and then I put RTV on both sides of the gasket. The gasket has a cutout right here to not plug this. Make sure if you're rebuilding yours that that isn't just full of crap, because that needs to be able to drain. Otherwise you will get leaks out of the input shaft. And this has a top and bottom because that is the drain also that goes down in there. So let's get some RTV out, some Permatex, bolt this on. We'll be almost done with this. And like I said, make sure you put a little bit of RTV on both sides of the gasket. Put the gasket on, make sure the drain is lined up on the gasket here. I put Permatex on all my bolt threads here and tighten these down. And this is actually going to finally let us put the pin on the counter shaft. So go ahead and get those tightened down. Let's slide this up here, and we're going to put the input shaft just off of the table. I'll have to move this camera around so you can see what I'm doing. And it's time to get our counter shaft lined up. Should be somewhat easy. Oh, I forgot to lock my casters. We just got to get the gears meshed. So now that I got the gears meshed, it should slide in fairly easy. A little bit of tapping is normal. And I forgot to put assembly lube on it now that I'm doing a balancing act here. And you should technically be able to do it the same way that we did it with the reverse idler gear. And T-handle it down in there. And if something isn't lined up, this will be very difficult. Keep pushing it down in there. Stick your tongue in the right direction. This might be the part where you try to find out with your finger here if that counter shaft is lined up good enough. Oh yeah, I feel the shaft. I feel that the bearing is not in the way. The thrust washer hasn't moved on me. Everything's lined up. So it's feeling good. Now let's go ahead and get these pinholes lined up here. So when we go to push both of these in, there's no fighting them. Hopefully that's enough right there. There. Now I wasn't hammering it in, I was just vibrating it to get it to move. And now we have our lock pin in. We can clean this out really good with some degreaser. Because remember, we shaved those edges there with the countersink or step bit, whatever you want to call it. So we have a little edge to put our silicone on. So these also are not blind eye holes, which means they can leak oil out of them. So when we go to bolt on our transmission mount, make sure you make sure you put Permatex on all of those. Make sure they're sealed up really good. And they're also laced. So after you screw this down, you lace the whole thing on. I've done that in previous videos, so go back and watch those if you want to actually see that step of the process. But otherwise, it's really simple. I'm going to clean this out really good, get all the assembly lube off of this. I'm going to put RTV right there. Then I'm going to put our gasket with RTV on both sides and our transmission mount. And then I'm going to put all the bolts in here with Permatex. Then I'm going to lace it up. And this transmission rebuild will be finished. All right, guys, that does it for our transmission rebuild with Zephyr gears. Very simple. Make sure you look at the small details while assembling it and use the correct thrust washers. So I hope you appreciated this video. I have more transmissions to do. My transmission videos always do really well. So thank you guys for watching it. Now that you have this information, get out in your garage and get your shift together.